Steven Moffat is back on Doctor Who for I think it's his 50th episode, more or less. How do we feel about that? Are we happy?
Yeah, make it to 50. It's a good place to stop, I think.
So discussing the 2024 Doctor Who Christmas special, Shooty Gatwa's second one, will be myself, Neo from Australia, Ingiga from England, Oliver also from England. Moffat's done a lot. Exciting to have him back for 2 so far in the new Russell T Davies era, the new and bold era. Yeah, what do we think of this one?
I quite liked it. I thought it was pretty good. It also feels like a good way to wrap things up, I would say. Not that he's not got any more fuel in him, but there's so much reiteration in this one that it feels like I would rather be watching other Steven Moffat projects than Doctor Who from now on.
Yeah, I'm completely in accordance with you there, especially on that last point. It does feel like, whenever Moffat's justifying coming back to write a new episode, it sounds like he says something like, well, I know how to write Doctor Who, so I just went and did it. And you can see, yes, he does know how to write Doctor Who, but it's almost making me miss the time when maybe he didn't know how to write for Doctor Who. Like, he hadn't done a million episodes, and he hadn't kind of like done all these bits and pieces over and over again to the point of refining all the surprise or like wonder out of them almost, because this episode, as much as you can see he's still doing things that work here and there, the whole episode feels less than the sum of its parts, because there's lots of individual bits and minisodes in this episode that I like and that are quite funny and enjoyable and clever in places and genuinely fun, but the whole thing lacks, I would say, like a center to tie it all together and make it into something better. The various bits don't necessarily feel like they're talking to each other or making each other better. And some of them also outright just don't necessarily work that well, in my opinion. So it just feels like Moffat setting his aim not that high and was writing a different kind of episode than he would usually would. Like the whole style of this Christmas special that we arrive at in the end, ultimately, particularly in the last 10-ish minutes, feels more like him trying to do like a Voyage of the Damned style, like RTD style, sort of ridiculous, knowingly sort of sloppy Christmas special. And it's like, it's not really it's different from Moffat, so I appreciate that, but it's not really what we kind of miss necessarily or kind of remembered well about his original era. So it's like, I'm ready for him to do something else now besides Doctor Who, yeah.
I thought I liked Boom better because it had that formal conceit. So I feel like it was really tight on, he's locked himself into doing a really specific sort of thing. It felt more theatrical. It was doing a lot of Moffat themes we've seen before, the digital ghosts and that sort of thing. But it was so locked into like one firm idea that worked a lot better for me. But like you said, this is I feel like this is a good episode. Like, I think it's good, but it's so all over the place that it just feels like, lots of good Moffat kind of stuff here, but it's just kind of spread out and there's not like one really strong focus to make it all cohere together like I thought Boom did. I don't know what you thought, Oliver.
Yeah, the first half is sort of vignettes, right? You get all the little episodes up to the big Anita bit, and I think they all work really well. And they set up enough of an emotional through line that sort of, in a nuts and bolts way, it is all tied together. But as you're saying, the plot in the second half ends up being very ropey, very sort of a little obvious, a little knowingly obvious, but definitely not as tied together with the stuff in the first half of the episode, which leaves the second half a bit fluffier.
I would kind of say, like, even though the lack of plot necessarily tying it together, that's not necessarily a big problem, as big a problem as it could be. Because like stuff like, say, Moffat cheating or using just a crap bootstrap paradox and drawing attention to how crap it is to tie one bit to another, and that's one thing, that's not great. But I think the real issue is that towards the end, instead of just ropey plot logic, you get ropey emotional logic, I think, is kind of what doesn't quite work about the last 10 or 7-ish minutes to me, particularly when it comes to Joy. So it feels like the bigger kind of problem is when that sort of ropiness leaks into the emotional sort of center of the episode. That's when you get stuff that really starts to not work as much.
Yeah, it's an odd one where if you're not already familiar with, how a companion story ends, according to Steven Moffat, then the ending doesn't actually fly. Like, it doesn't scan as what it's meant to. it doesn't read as if it's this big ascension to something better, which is how all the Moffat companion stories end. It feels totally different to that and jarring and dark in a way that doesn't feel totally on purpose, because that emotional logic into the last beat isn't super clear.
I don't know if you guys got this, but if we're talking about like lapses in logic, it felt a bit to me like a Chibnall era episode, because it like front loads, we have a bunch of different locations across the globe, and it's not really that important to the story, but like we're starting, look, we're here, we're there. You know how Resolution or Spyfall or Praxeus do, and it's not like a huge expensive episode where it doesn't look like I'm sure it was, but it doesn't look like a huge expensive big spectacle-y episode. But it kind of felt a little empty to me. Like, look at all the stuff, we're going around all these places, it's Mount Everest, isn't that cool? We'll do the big bold font on screen, and then it's just little logic-y not lining up in certain bits of it. It almost felt to me like there's bits of the 2024 season that feel like super derivative of Russell T Davies' first era, but I felt a little like ghost of the Chibnall era in aspects of this. Am I crazy? Am I just overreading the font? Do you guys get any of that?
Yeah, one of the big things with the Chibnall era locations is you get the big impact title card, and then all the actual scenes in Osaka or wherever are just in little rooms.
Yeah.
So it's like gesturing towards the scale, but not actually doing any scale. And in this, it's literally little rooms. Like, everywhere we go is just a little room because it's a hotel, which feels sort of knowing. And then obviously the title cards pay off at the end as a joke, as the joke of the episode. So it feels like it's doing those beats intentionally, but not necessarily well for doing them.
Yeah, I think that Chib comparison, yeah, that makes sense. You can definitely feel almost maybe Moffat having a go at doing a Chib-esque thing and seeing what his take on that would be. And I guess, yeah, that sequence where the Doctor is going back through all the various time rooms and just assembling his clever plan to kind of like open the shrine. I mean, that's I enjoyed that bit. It's not like terrible or anything. I feel like that's probably a bit more attentiveness, I guess, to like the use of the various locations than maybe we might have expected in the Chib equivalent of the same story. But still, nonetheless, it does. I mean, you're right. It's basically just expanding the scale just for the sake of doing it. And the whole, especially that whole bit at the end when we go back and see the star shining on all of them individually, and those guys in World War, like, I can't remember.
Two, I think.
Can't remember. It was 2. Okay, and they're like, "Oh, see, there's a star. There is still hope after all. Keep calm, and carry on." And that whole bit, felt sort of workmanlike in a way that I guess probably applies to a lot of the episode, really, but just kind of a quite superficial, like, "Haha, feel good" bit.
I also thought it was odd. We get 2 rope-based climaxes in a row, because Emperor Have Death climaxes with the Doctor has like a bootstrappy magic rope that he uses to defeat Sutekh. And this climaxes with, I like this much more because it ties together the locations and it's like a fun kind of physical space thing of how the rope is used. But that's just an odd bit of doubling there.
Yeah, when the Doctor said he was good with rope or something, I was terrified he was going to get the intelligent rope out in Sutekh. I was like, no, please. So I was relieved that it was just a regular old rope.
There's bits of the episode that are definitely playing off the last series deliberately, but the rope is clearly just using a rope because a rope needs to be used in the scenario. That's a way to connect different time zones in an interesting way. And then backwards reasoning from that, hey, rope, I guess, is this Doctor's thing. Which leaves it a sort of arbitrary symbol. Like, 15's thing is rope, and I guess the language of rope, but in a way that's not really been substantiated. But I love that visual.
I feel like Hideo Kojima would love this. He's all about ropes, isn't he?
Yeah, like Hideo Kojima. I'm playing Death Stranding at the moment.
Yeah.
It's great.
Oh, really? That's a great coincidence.
I don't know any of the characters' names. Are you playing it?
No, but I'm familiar with, he always talks about like ropes versus sticks in terms of like game design, like ideology and stuff, and like connecting people rather than pushing them apart. Sorry, that was just a complete tangent.
The Doctor gets that big snarling. I love Shudi's performance in this scene. Your room was the worst, loneliest, saddest hotel room in the world. What kind of sad sack human train wreck puts themselves in a room like that at Christmas? Loved his performance there. It was so cool to see Shudi play a darker, angrier, crueler kind of Doctor. I really liked seeing him stretch that way.
Because your room is the worst, loneliest, saddest hotel room in the world.
The room itself, it looks like nice.
It's fine, yeah. It's a fine room. Nothing wrong with it.
Like going into Christmas alone for a week, I guess you can read that. That's weird, you know, a regular English person or whatever. But the room looks totally fine to me. What did you think of that as well?
Yeah, I agree. I would say the visual storytelling could have put in a lot more work to making that hotel room seem as bad as the script was trying to make it sound. But also, even if they had kind of the whole premise of that, like the horrible hotel room, and just like really judging people, the idea that only someone who hates themselves would get in a crap hotel room, that feels a little bit like maybe unself-aware expression of how Moff views the world that maybe isn't necessarily true for everyone. I'm kind of dancing around the point here. I feel like another reason you might get a crap hotel room is if it's the only one you can afford. And maybe if you haven't considered what people who can't afford nice hotel rooms but still need to get one might live like, then maybe you'd write something like this. It just feels like maybe this is an example of something, a kind of a blind spot in Moff's writing.
Yeah.
Where he's like, everyone, this is so relatable, right? You will get this, right? And just people are like, no, what are you talking about? So, yeah, maybe it doesn't work as well as it could. I mean, I like what Moff tries to do with the whole paralleling Joy's self-hatred with the Doctor's thing, even if it's not necessarily that insightful in the scheme of things. It's particularly because of how little characterization Joy gets outside of that bit. But, as an actual point about like life or the world, it doesn't necessarily ring that true.
Yes, it's interesting that parallel relies on both of them having picked that room when, if Joy's booking in on Christmas Day, then that's quite likely the room they have left.
Yeah.
And the Doctor's in that room because it's the one linked to the hotel. So neither of them did actually choose it, which isn't super important, but it's a slightly two loose ends that don't quite tie. Yeah, it's also slightly odd that that hotel room in the Sandringham is even attached to the Time Hotel, because it's not luxurious or, as far as we know, historically important. But maybe something really significant happens there just off screen.
Maybe it's like the cheapest room the Time Hotel has. Like the cheapest option is you can just go to a normal London hotel in the 22th. Yeah.
I mean, you could like throw a dart at any current like contemporaneous event in like the news and say like, hey, that's what you can come visit if you go in this room in the Time Hotel. You can see like Elon Musk or like, well, not you can't see him, but you can see the collapse of the UK for one reason or another. I'm sure there's something you could confabulate.
It's advertised as the last days of the British Empire.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of on that note, I liked, well, the last bit of it, I don't know, but I kind of liked the COVID stuff. That surprised me. It felt like it's something most television isn't really touching, or most, I can only, Glass Onion engaged with it a lot, but most stuff, at least that wasn't made during COVID, seems to really want to just move on, which I totally get. But I thought it was interesting I thought Joy's resentment of politicians and the Partygate stuff, I thought that rang really true, like for a character. I don't know about the mum star glowing thing, that pulled me out a bit, but I thought that was a cool little bit of characterization. It surprised me for Moffat to do that. Like, it felt very real for Doctor Who, and I thought it worked pretty well for me. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved that aspect. I've had a lot of family ill and in hotels over Christmas this year, so it hit particularly hard with me. And I found it really jarring to go from the light, fluffy, fast stuff and that cut right at the end, and we're just in the hotel. I found that a really stark contrast between the different directions the story's pulling in a way that I think worked, and the hard reality of COVID as a thing that happened, and also a thing that we can't time travel back to. If you'll forgive me going on a little bit of a tangent, you get this setup all the way through the episode that this is a time hotel, it can go anywhere, you can go back and visit things that you missed, whatever, and we know that Joy's mum died and she never got a chance to say goodbye to her in hospital, and you, savvy viewer, I'm sure noticed, well, those two things sort of fit together. We could use the time hotel to go back and give Joy that moment. And the episode doesn't do that, right? Even, a hospital's sort of a hotel in a way. So there could even be a door into that hospital in the hotel. But the episode very deliberately doesn't do that. It feels like drawing a line in a way that Moffat sometimes does between what is okay for TV and what's not. And we can't use time travel to go back and visit the people we've lost in this context. That's not how it works. But there's this other mechanism by which we get to see them again, which is more spiritual and slightly fluffier. But I found that distinction going, the time travel logic of the rest of the episode just doesn't apply to this real world thing, because in the real world, there is no time travel, the afterlife, I guess. But yes, I found that effective.
I can see, like, it doesn't feel in character for Moffat's usual stuff to suddenly like lurch into something very real and kind of political in that way. He kind of tends to dance around that stuff, I feel, when it comes to really specific stuff. I mean, sometimes, he'll give like a big speech about one thing or another, but when it comes to like a really specific, actual, like, an angry sort of point about life and something you really directly recognize, that feels like a refreshing sort of twist. And yeah, I mean, that central scene where we find out kind of what happened to Joy and how, and just the rawness of that kind of guilt and sort of trauma and self-blame, and just the feeling of something irrevocably wrong, the feeling of having, let down someone who is now gone. I thought that was a really great kind of anchor. And really, I feel like, the thing is, I feel like it's the sort of thing that is powerful enough that a whole episode could be built around it, which this isn't, in my opinion. I kind of feel like this is kind of like that COVID bit in the middle of the episode kind of feels like its own thing almost, whereas the other bits are like, in terms of, if you had to pick like a linking theme for all the different bits of this episode, I guess you would pick like togetherness or friendship or hope, which are like the biggest, vaguest things in existence. Whereas, someone's trauma from losing a relative, during COVID isolation period is like an incredibly raw and specific thing. So, again, like, as usual, I kind of wish stuff was explored more. I would say the thing is, when you do something sort of very real like that, I kind of feel like, and, you're speaking to people's real trauma and people's real, like, existence. Like, from actually, some people have actually gone through, and you're basing your story directly on that. The resolution of it and Joy's character arc, so to speak, that leaves me with questions, because what are we saying? Because I sort of craved an ending where Joy was both able to have closure and also move on with her life. Whereas what we get is kind of like this weird thing where by, becoming a star and leaving behind her life entirely, then, she gets to like absorb her mum again and whatever. It just feels weirdly like, I guess my actual issue is that we don't get anything of Joy outside that trauma with her mum. So we know nothing about her life outside that. She's kind of, and whereas in real life, most people have like at least two things going on in their life. They probably have at least one other thing that kind of indicates who they are, what's going on in their life separately from that. So when she ultimately leaves her life behind to become a star, there's such a really vague idea of what exactly has changed or what has been lost. It just feels just a bit, something feels abstracted from life about it, and it just rings oddly to me. Like, and we don't really understand like what. It just feels like something that should be bigger, but maybe it isn't, or maybe it's too big that this is happening, and this is like there's just ultimately a strange response. Like, you're telling people who lost like the parent or lost a relative, which everyone does eventually, to you're basically telling them that, hey, just like give your life and then and it's all fine. Yeah, it just feels like kind of very loosely stitched together for me, which I wanted something tighter when we're talking about something this raw and real.
Joy is very sort of themesily sketched. The story knows what she needs to be for the arcs, for the big ideas, but as an actual person, I didn't get the sense of her, existing. Like, the characterization is very effective, it's very efficient. Her talking to the fly in her room, you get what her deal is, but like you say, it's a very one-dimensional deal. There's one thing defining her life, and it's a big thing, and it's, that's fine for a secondary character, which she essentially is in the episode. She's essentially a secondary character, but it's weird that the episode's named after her, which means you're looking closely at her for characterization, and she's not actually got that much going on. It's a bit of a clash.
Yeah, and also when it comes to her sort of a final ascensional transformation and she's glowing and she's talking to the doctor, I feel like even her characterization starts to slip a bit, because she starts talking to the doctor in this way that I feels more like the script doing what it needs rather than doing what is true to the story and the character. When she starts talking to the doctor, like, my funny little doctor.
Yes.
You need to find a companion. I'm just like, why are you saying this? This is so unearned, isn't it?
It felt like the Runaway Bride script to me. I felt like Catherine Tate did that exact speech of, Doctor, you need someone and you can't be... I feel like I've heard this like 10 times in the last 20 years of Doctor Who.
Yeah, I want to get onto the point of iteration and repetitiveness, and because this is an arc that we have done and done and done again, and the episode knows that.
It's perfect. It's us three talking, actually, because it was us that talked about the giggle.
Yeah.
And the big thing, and we had different opinions on it, but the big thing with the giggle is the idea at the ending of we're going to leave this weird like meta idea of we're going to leave New Who's themes or angst or something with David Tennant. And then Ncuti Gatwa is going to go on Unburdened or something, which we discussed that in lots of ways. But whatever we thought of that, I don't think it's really happened so much. What the idea getting argued there, I like a lot of this New Who stuff. I love the show. A lot of this stuff is really effective. The Doctor's characterization and stuff. But it's just this kind of surreal experience to go, hey, I've heard this speech many times before by many different actors, and I didn't love that. Like it rings true-ish to me. Like it works as character stuff, but I just feel like I've seen this a lot, and I'd like to see other stuff.
I was just going to say, just before we get all the way away from it, the big themes that connect to the things that seem to connect the hospital to the rest of the episode, to me, are the big ideas of visiting versus, being there permanently. The hotel's a way that you visit, and Joy wasn't there permanently, and that's a tension. She wasn't there when she needed to be because the hospital's only a place where you visit, and she was only visiting and she missed a thing. And that's a big thing for the Doctor, because the Doctor visits, and the Time Hotel is the TARDIS, right? It's a magic door that appears in the middle of nowhere, and you visit for a bit and then you leave. So, which is a great vehicle for the Moffat themes of visiting and waiting, and that's everything with Amy, and it's also everything with Clara. It's also a lot of what's going on with Bill, and like you say, it's a lot of the same stuff we've done before. The Doctor this Christmas learns to go back for his friends, which is the same as many of the last Christmases, including Last Christmas. It's the same as Husbands of Riversong. It's the same as Doctor the Widow and the Wardrobe. It's what we do at Christmas, but it's very repetitive.
And I feel like in this case, like with 15, it's actually starting to feel not just repetitive, but actually incoherent, because I don't feel like 15 is a Doctor who actually needs to be told he needs to go and make a friend, because in this story we see actually making friends is not difficult for him in a way that it maybe was for 12 or even 11. Because we see, with Anita, right? The whole sequence when he's in the hotel with her, there are lots of gags that you kind of recognize maybe from Smith Who, like the Doctor stays in one place and he acts really quirky and he does like kind of Time Lordy stuff around a mundane environment. But it's not necessarily played as him failing to fit in, but rather he pulls it off with effortless confidence, and he strikes up a really productive, positive bond. He initiates his friendship with Anita. He invites her to kind of sit with him, and they get on like a house on fire. He slots into that environment perfectly, and that does feel like a way in which 15 is actually distinct from kind of previous Doctors, because it's a bit hard to imagine some of the previous ones kind of playing that situation a bit like that. But then you still have this whole focus on how, oh, Doctor, you're so bad at making friends. You're so socially isolated. And it's like, is he really? It just feels like the actual characterization 15 is screaming and straining to be this more sociable Doctor. But like the dramatic requirements of the show are insisting that actually he's this, hermit, like loner type who, can't talk to people about his feelings, but was like, well, he clearly can. So it's like it's starting to feel like the show is at odds with itself. Like the show can't really get a grip on what it is doing or what it wants to do, because I feel on one hand, I feel like Moff kind of has a sort of a bit of a nightmare brief trying to do something with 15's characterization, because over the course of season 1, there's been just so little real direction, I guess, regarding what 15 is really supposed to be or what's really going on with him. It's been so up and down. So Moff kind of has to kind of fall back on things that he knows work, right? Things about his Doctor that he likes to write and that are dramatically generative. So stuff like the Doctor kind of being sort of angsty towards himself. This is why you're always alone. This is why you're always like this. But it's kind of like, I mean, not just like in the context of New Who overall, but even in the context of just Disney Who, just looking at that and just looking at Ncuti's stuff, it doesn't necessarily ring that true to what he's actually like. Those are my feelings.
Totally agree, especially on becoming friends with Anita being a thing that only 15 would do. I think that's actually really effective in the episode. The way that Anita's characterized as the most boring person early on, right? There's a Silurian in the hotel room and she's just doing her job and she's not curious about it. She's not asking questions or getting involved. She's an anti-companion kind of character in that way. And you can imagine most other Doctors, especially Moffat's Doctors, being bored and dismissive by and of her. And 15 has that. The patience isn't quite the right word, but I suppose he's more curious interpersonally and is willing to get to know her well enough that they form an actual bond. And it turns out she is interesting, actually, which is what happens when you get to know people, it turns out. But also having to learn that lesson clashes with, like you said, that aspect of 15's character. And what stood out especially to me is the chairs thing, which is very clever. That's great storytelling in a mechanical way, picking up on something that's inherent to the format of the show as it currently exists, making it into a character beat that's done visually excellent. I love that stuff. That's what you get in Moffat for. But and that is a great moment, bringing up the design of the TARDIS as not having any chairs, because that annoys me. I've talked about that. But what stood out to me is that several of the last few TARDISes did have chairs, specifically the Doctors who had done this emotional journey already. 10's got chairs, 11's definitely got chairs, 12's got lots of chairs and does lots of sitting around in the TARDIS. So that felt like an interesting example of how it's literally a regression of character, because the TARDIS did used to have chairs, and now it doesn't again since 13's era. But it did used to. We got to that point. We put chairs in the TARDIS.
And also, one of the first things 15 said in his entire life, one of his first moments directly after being born was, this place could really use a chair. Literally his first defining moments on the screen is when he notices very distinctly and discreetly and points out that this place needs a chair. And then like an entire season later, we're having him realise, oh my God, I need a chair. So that is a very literal, real and very unfortunate specific example of the character kind of rewinding and like us forgetting things about him. Like they're basically having statements at the start of like the Doctor's tenure, which just like fall away because we aren't actually committed to building that into his character later on. I feel like this isn't necessarily new because like in the Christmas, I don't want to get too much into this, but like in Christmas Invasion, for example, 10 starts off and he comes in, he's like, no second chances. I'm that sort of a man. I've realised I'm the man who gives no second chances. And then like throughout the rest of his like tenure, I mean, yeah, he has moments where he's like the big judge, jury and executioner again, like Family of Blood, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily like his most defining trait that he never gives people second chances. It was like one of these weird artifacts of his first episode that didn't really get carried through, and that feels like another thing with 15 now. Like that's sort of happening again. Like they make all these big statements in this first sequence, but then like ultimately his characterization over the course of the show is just like waffling off somewhere else. It's a bit frustrating.
I watched Mad Men this year.
That was fast.
Or last year, I suppose. And all the way through, the whole tension of Mad Men, all the way through, is whether the main character, Don Draper, is actually going to be able to change this time. And he keeps trying and failing, and trying and failing. All the way through to the very last episode. I can't put my finger on exactly why that worked for me. And this sort of iterative regression and relearning and regression and relearning isn't working for me. And I wonder if it's just a case of having let the air out. As in, for me, as a viewer of this show for a very long time, maybe we've just reached a point where I've seen the Doctor learn and regress this same lesson so many times. I'm under no apprehension that this time it's going to stick and that he's going to have a healthier relationship with chairs and doors than he has in the past.
Yeah. I feel like Mad Men is such a like the show changes so much through like its own different eras, but it's very much, it's all the one vision, or the 7 or 8, however you count them, seasons. The ambiguity with Don is such a, like from the end of season 1 onwards, you get how much it's like a shadow self of, is the character this, is the character that, can he be this, can he be that? It feels like the showrunner there is really playing with the ambiguity and trying to, it's like if when there's regression in there, as there is heaps in the show, it feels like it's very much, you're meant to be kind of frustrated with Don for like folding back and stuff like that. But Doctor Who, like, or New Who and onwards, has like, it's kind of different shows, and it's kind of different, well, not really different showrunners, but it's kind of different people coming in. And it's like, it doesn't feel like an intentional thing, especially with the 15th, who I feel like was announced in such a triumphant, like Gig said, the chairs thing. He was announced in such a, I'm not going to be this man anymore way. So for him to become, like Gig said, like the 10 Tenet, oh, actually I am folding back thing, it doesn't feel intentional to me. Whereas with Mad Men, it feels so intentional. To even when you're getting frustrated with Don, it's not like you're not meant to feel that way. And I feel like, I don't want to think it's just a generational thing of like we're getting sick of New Who or whatever. I feel like it is this era, and the era didn't have to be like a whole new thing, but that's how it announced itself in the giggle, and that's how it was starting off, was we're going to be like this now. And for it to not be like that, there's nothing, well, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing routine Doctor Who very well, but I don't think this is like super, like, I like this episode, but it's I don't think it's so good to earn doing The Runaway Bride again.
I wonder how much of it is that the show has calcified in its format and is resistant to actually changing the way that the character changing would demand. I've had a pet idea for a long time. The TARDIS needn't be a hotel, necessarily. It doesn't need to be a place where one person comes and stays for a little bit and then leaves. There's lots of people throughout history who you could just pick up and live with them their whole lives, and they stay permanently, and the show, I think, is flexible enough to accommodate a very different relationship to TARDIS travel than the sort of short stay format that we're still getting now. I mean, Moffat did try to change this. The big thing when Clara's introduced, sort of following up on Amy and Rory, is that she's not going to travel full time. She'll do it as a weekend thing, you know. She'll go travelling after school or in the holidays. And that seems to have not quite stuck. It's sort of there in the Chibnall Companions and with Ruby. We've also sort of regressed to the old model of running away and then eventually getting tired and going back home. I don't know, I feel like you could change the format in some slightly more radical ways.
Yeah.
And find new drama in that.
I think the character of the Doctor is, I think Moffat and Davis have done so many things with the character, and they've kind of done, I'm not going to say they've done everything with the character they can do, because they probably could do more novel and new things with him, but they don't seem to be doing that or wanting to do that. But the companion role is totally, it's always open to, you know, do completely different things with. I'd love something like that. I'd love you'd have to change the actor, which would be hard for lots of reasons. But what if the Doctor was with a companion like their whole life, like child actor, adult actor, maybe a different actor for old age, like in 73 Yards. What if we did like we see their whole life, and maybe they live with the Doctor for, you know, like their whole life or something. I don't know. Like you're saying, there's different ways you could change the hotel-y format, which could be the thing to spice up. You might not need to change the Doctor's character if you can't or you don't want to. It could be something like that instead. Yeah.
That's sick. I like that.
You know, when it comes to regression, just on the note of like the regressing in the Doctor, and you mentioned like Mad Men earlier and how the drama is how like the main character keeps kind of frustrating the viewer with him kind of going back on himself. It feels like that with Doctor Who, like we aren't getting that intentional kind of frustration thing that you said there. They don't make drama out of the regression itself. That just happens quietly, and they just want drama out of him unregressing, I guess, or him making like the positive journey again. And they just kind of skip over the bit where he made the reverse, like the negative journey in the first place. So they aren't really mining it for like a real story beat. It's like the story there isn't happening. It's like it's unhappening. Like the just quiet, invisible like rewinding of the character. That's kind of the problem, isn't it? Because it's not being made real. And that's when kind of you see the seams, like you see like the gears working. You just see like the mechanical nature of it all. Is that we're just doing this again because this is the only bit we know how to do. And we aren't like really bothering to make that like a full story of him going backwards and forwards. We just have him going forwards, and then he's going forwards again from the place he was in before, and we skip the bit in between.
Credit to the giggle, because I think I didn't like it very much. But that's one of the things it successfully does, I think, is identifying this as the end, in inverted commas, of a repeating pattern. The same way that Heaven Sent frames it as something that's happening again and again and again and again. Even down to the music being pulled from one to the other.
Yeah.
But yeah, the giggle's very aware that this is a big pattern of behaviour and it's repetitive and that's got to stop. Whereas in this one, it's just one repetition that isn't so much framed in the broader context.
I don't really think, like, there's very long stretches of Classic Who where the Doctor is super static. I don't think that's an issue. Like, because you just make the companion stories more interesting, or you make the stories of the week more interesting themselves then. But it's the show now that keeps drawing attention to, like, the Doctor characterization. And then I'm like, well, it's not that interesting if you're just repeating it. So maybe focus less on this and focus more on just doing really tight stories of the week, which season 1 sometimes did. Dot and Bubble and 73 Yards were pretty interesting stories of the week. Or just make the companion story really good, which season 1 did at times, and both Moffat and Davis have done before. So it's just weird to bring our attention in a really like big way to Doctor character stuff when it's like kind of incongruous or not great. Just you don't have to make that perfect. Just do something else instead.
Also, another thing I just realised about why this is why you're always alone, Doctor, the whole Doctor lambasting himself for being so isolated thing. Another reason it doesn't work for 15, like we've just saw him like Rogue, right? He literally just like had a whole flirtation with a complete stranger he barely met, and he fell in love with that man like in the space of one episode. It's like he is so open to people and to characters that he meets, that this whole thing, you're always alone, you're probably isolating yourself. No, he isn't. He was trying to jump that man's bones literally like just now. So again, it's like those moments, like that episode was actually great for 15. He felt like such a real character in that story. And it's like we're just ignoring all the good bits here, and we're just depriving ourselves.
Also, he's got like 4 companions this episode.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of the iteration thing, I thought that was quite an interesting conceit. I'm not sure it worked, and I think by doing 4 of them slightly, you're not doing any one character particularly well.
Like the last era.
Yeah. But you've got Trev, who's super obedient. You've got Anita, who's a normal person. You've got Joy, who's doing the sort of trad companion ascension narrative. I guess not trad, but it's become trad. Who does the whole companion thing. She grabs the briefcase, she goes into the sky and becomes an immortal space god. And then you've got what's her name from the train. Do you remember her name?
Did we find out her name? Did she have a name?
Yeah, so she's credited as a real historical person, I believe. Sylvia Trench, that's it.
I thought she was weirdly focused on, I was like, who is this person? So that's interesting. There's something there.
She's not a real historical person. She's the first Bond girl, Sylvia Trench. So she's the in-universe James Bond first Bond girl.
Ah.
Which is a very weird decision. Why would you make your random side character in-universe a Bond girl? My thought was a Bond girl is essentially a Doctor Who companion. They're not identical, but they're very similar roles, right? Very similar kinds of things. You're a essentially disposable, in a format way, side character to the male main character's emotional journey. And so she gets introduced as that, and then the Doctor tries to give her advice, and he gets everything wrong, and she corrects him about the letters, and then the Doctor goes away and doesn't successfully recruit her. She's the companion who says no, who isn't interested, which was interesting to me as the 4th iteration of the companion vignette thing in the episode. That the first one's super obedient, the second one's normal, the third one does the companion journey, ending in an ascension, and the 4th one just isn't interested to begin with, and sees through the Doctor straight away. Which I suppose you could read as making an argument that companions are done. that the good companion going forward is one who isn't actually interested in the Doctor at all. Yes, that was a tangent.
It's interesting.
Back over to you.
So I'm having my mind blown slightly right now by the James Bond stuff, because he actually went and confirmed it in an interview and everything, and he talked about it, like why he put that there. I was like, whoa, he really went into it. Like,
oh, I didn't know he had talked about it. What did he say?
Moff felt Sylvia deserved better than she got on from pop culture. He says, like, Sylvia Trench remains James Bond's girlfriend for the first 2 films. He has a regular girlfriend back home in the first 2 films, Moffat emphasised. But while she was doing all that, she was also having an affair with a woman travelling on the Orient Express. I thought that's inevitable. I felt I was doing her justice because she's the most cheated on woman in the history of fiction because she made the mistake to go out with James Bond. So he made her a queer icon, basically. so she has cheating on James Bond with a woman. Okay, like, sure. Yeah. Well, that's certainly interesting. Like, I didn't pick up any of that from the episode, and watching it, I was like, hang on. Like, because that last scene where, like, he's dissing the letter that she's written, and then she says, well, actually, I'm writing it to a woman, and he gives like, oh, well done, glad I could help. And she weirdly smiles after him, like, hey, yeah, and then it's all smiles. I thought that sequence played kind of weirdly to me. Like, it just felt like, what the heck? It just a very strange kind of thing, kind of I guess I can see what, like, the idea is. Like, Moff wanted something there to, I guess, show the Doctor's positive impact on, like, random people that he meets, and his supportiveness of, like, queer icons throughout history. And yeah, I appreciate that. I sympathise with that. It just felt like it just felt so jarring into the episode that I just couldn't help but find it strange. Still, I mean, interesting. Moffat had all this headcanon behind it, at least.
I'm not sure I would characterize his impact on her as positive. I mean, it's sort of, the whole thing's very friendly, but he gives advice and he's wrong. Like, he fumbles it bad. And all the way through the episode, you've got beats like that. It's, the whole plot unravels out of the Doctor getting things wrong right from the start. He doesn't follow the briefcase because he sort of doesn't want to. He's a bit proud. And so that leads to all the hotel staff dying. He doesn't want Joy to go and explode in the sky, despite that, I guess, creating civilization that the hotel in the future is based in. And there's another one I can't quite remember. Oh yeah, he opens the case, which almost kills them all, except for a bootstrap loop cheat, which saves the day. So you've got a lot of emphasis on the Doctor getting things wrong, which is very Moffat.
I can't believe that Bond thing. That is so strange. That's such a weird Moffat, like who could have thought of that? And you both put that together. That's so weird.
One of his little obsessions that just made it in there completely unnoticed, apparently, until he goes on the record talking about it.
There's another weird but good thing in the episode. The whole Anita vignette. I was reading Moffat in an interview lately talking about, so Anita was originally barely in the episode. I presume just the bits she is like at the start, the exchange about the lizard man and everything. And Moffat wanted to have the Doctor travel around the world in that year and eventually have a kid in Japan correct him on how he could have got in back to the time hotel or whatever. So we wanted to do like a big budget thing of the Doctor goes and does this and he does that. And it was told it was too much budget, and so he tries to do a smaller scale version of it. The Doctor goes and does this and does that until he kept getting knocked back, and so he came to the idea of just staying in the hotel, having him as a worker in the hotel with Anita, which is funny because was the most enjoyable bit of the episode to me. So it's interesting it comes from, he didn't want to do that. He was trying to resist that and do like a big, more spectacle style thing, but he ends up doing I guess it's kind of, we talked about how it's a bit, well, it is 15-y that he makes friends with her so nicely. It's not a too tight, I think, for the character. It doesn't feel exactly like the Power of Three and that sort of thing to me. Moffat himself says in Closing Time and The Caretaker and episodes like that, the Doctor's got a mystery to solve. He's got a mission. In the Power of Three, he can't bear it. He gets through an afternoon and then just runs off because he can't bear it. But this time, all he can do is sit and work in that hotel for a year. I think it's the first time we quite see him do that. So I do think it is a bit distinct, and I really liked. It was just a really enjoyable, low stakes bit of the episode. Just enjoying 15's character. Russell T. Davis, Moffat says, was quite keen on cutting it at one point, and I wanted it in. I said I don't believe it until he's trying. As much as he's liking his little life in the hotel and adoring Anita, he'd still be rattling at the door, trying to find a way out of it. I think that's quite fundamental to his nature. I thought that scene was a nice little joke, but it also tells us he hasn't given up. I could not believe that he just sit on his heels. You've got to know he's always trying to leave. So I think the idea there isn't that Russell's trying to cut out the entire sequence. It's that he's trying to cut out the honeymoon couple scene.
Oh, that bit. Okay, fair enough. Sorry.
That's an interesting kind of back and forth because Moffat's like, no, this is a distinct thing from the other Doctor stays in one point things. And we're like talking up, it's an interesting thing with 15 that he is kind of into this. And then Moffat's also kind of doubling back and going, but I wanted to have him trying to get out. And Russell was saying, cut that. It's funny how that they kind of displace each other's attitudes sometimes onto each other. I think Russell and Moffat, sometimes what you'd think one of them would say is what the other one's saying. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, especially how that sequence kind of came out of nowhere, production-wise, which I think you can feel in the episode. It's like it's an odd little thing that the story just stops for this like fun little interlude. But yeah, just some interesting behind-the-scenes stuff, I guess, there.
So that original idea of him traveling around the world in that year and going to Japan and working out how to solve the code from his travels, that sounds shit. Like, I'm really glad that didn't happen.
Originally, I just wanted as many insane places for Shooty to turn up with his tray. You're thinking, what the hell is going on here, right?
One of the greatest surprises in this episode is Anita, played by Steph, who honestly just had 10 lines in the first draft. And then we all liked her so much, and Steven liked her so much, he kept adding lines, and now she's become a major character in it.
I guess the bit of this episode that lands, feels the most coherent, feels the most, like it's firing all cylinders, is the Anita sequence, in my opinion. And in fact, that wasn't even in there originally. It's like, oh, I mean, I'm glad we get these fortunate accidents with Moff scripts, but it's like, you know, it doesn't necessarily reflect that well on the rest of the episode or the story or whatever. Kind of the best bit of it just happens, is a separate thing that just emerges by itself, almost like out of nowhere. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it is. I think just it feels also like the bit where the direction is working the best. Like it feels like where everyone seems to get like what is what the idea is here. Like the way that the progression of time is shown, like the shots with like the chairs or like the decorations changing, just how the Doctor is presented, kind of smoothly doing all the stuff with like the automated mop or whatever. It all just felt very like coherent and well realized, and its kind of self-contained nature being like sealed off from all the hijinks in the rest of the episode just seemed to like make it. It just felt like it was just doing its own thing, and it wasn't kind of worried about anything else. And I just liked how that plays out, and I don't mind weird structures like that. I actually like the idea of an episode grinding to a halt to suddenly do this completely random other thing. I like it having this weird like novel-like progression. You know, I love how in Listen you go from kind of one act to another act to another act, and they don't necessarily it doesn't like necessarily propel from one to another. They just kind of sit there. I like those kind of thoughtful structures, and I thought it was completely fine in this case. But again, you know, the rest of the episode kind of feels like it's not as focused as that, I guess.
The drawings on the wall, especially, and the model TARDISes from just off the internet, particularly great. That kind of visual storytelling again, leaning on imagery all the way back from Moffat's first episode as showrunner. That's lovely stuff. How many times is the Doctor gonna end up in an identical copy of Amelia's bedroom? It's where he always ends up.
It also reminds me of the other time that was reprised, which I guess is Time of the Doctor, isn't it? Because when he's in the town of Christmas and Translaw, like, and all the kids are kind of doing their little drawings and making their little models and stuff. It felt like his little workshop. And this episode reminded me of that as well, when he's doing the mini TARDISes and stuff. I
feel like the main premise of the episode is a very like child-brained. It sounds insulting. It's a very child-brained thing. Moffat said, as a child, I always wondered about the other door in a hotel room, the one that wouldn't open. I was obsessed with Narnia and, of course, obsessed with Doctor Who, so I believed in the power of doorways to take you somewhere extraordinary. And I like that. This is me speaking now, not Moffat. And I like that idea. Like, it was fun seeing, I loved seeing Bilbo's door, the Hobbit door, in the episode. I like seeing some of the fun little doors. Like, there was a lot of visual invention and fun stuff were there. But I think it was really enough to drive. Well, maybe it was. I don't feel like the episode explored the time hotel idea. It's a weird episode. It's like it's a bunch of vignettes of kind of different things, of like Moffat pet ideas. The time hotel idea, the doorway, it's a very British fantasy portal, like he's saying thing. I like that a lot. I guess it would have been a budget buster, but I would have liked to kind of play more, I don't know, somehow with we don't really get into the whole hotel idea heaps, and it was a pretty interesting idea.
It's interesting because it's a bit of a non-conceit for Doctor Who specifically, because the premise is, you know, there's a place you can go that can take you anywhere in time and space.
Yeah.
Like, the hotel just... And this even happens, like, in the episode. The Doctor goes, well, we can't use the TARDIS for plot reasons, but fortunately, we're in a time hotel. It's just a TARDIS episode. It's an episode about flying around in the TARDIS, but the TARDIS has been carefully replaced with a hotel that links to all the places it needs to be linked to. And that adds some constraints, I guess, on how the time travel works, which gives you the loop with Anita and stuff like that. But yeah, it's not really a premise for Doctor Who. It's Doctor Who's normal premise with some very slight extra detailing on it.
I guess almost the imaginary episode that isn't happening here would be one where the time hotel... I feel like an episode that was truly about the time hotel would ultimately be one where either the hotel itself turned out to be sinister somehow, or something sinister was attached to it, or somehow like the whole premise of being able to like... I think it's... They don't really interrogate the premise of just being able to like vacate like in any time period like that and just like take over other people's like rooms and hotels and their lives from your privileged position of existing in the far future. Because that is never kind of looked into. So we just kind of sit with this idea that the time hotel is this lovely, like completely unproblematic thing. And that kind of prevents us ever really going into it, because we've just got this other, this Villengard Starseed plotline just happens to be occurring in the hotel. And I guess, I used the shooty pronunciation. My mistake. Sorry, I will never do that again. Yeah, I guess on one hand, obviously it's like, if you've got a setting like the time hotel, obviously you can do stuff just happening within that. It can just be a setting, I suppose. But obviously we're probably never going to go back there. So again, I just feel like if you're doing your one time hotel story, it feels like you've kind of missed an opportunity there if you just make it about something else.
Also feels like an identification of the ways that the current roster of writers, as of right now, have a slightly limited perspective, because the house themes of you know, waiting and visiting and all that stuff are interesting, and they map very neatly onto the time hotel. But you can imagine how another writer would bring a totally different and perhaps more original perspective to the time hotel, based maybe around the intrusion or the negative impacts of visiting other places, other times and spaces as a tourist, right? The cost of tourism, the inability to properly interface with a time or place by just visiting, right? You can see how another writer might take that in a new direction rather than reiterating older ideas.
Yeah, I guess it's ironic we kind of, and this is such a nun point, we're kind of reiterating the same idea now and again at the fringes of other writers, but it's so like, and I don't want, because it's a whole meta discussion we'd be in for hours if we really got into it, but we do keep kind of coming to the same thing of they're the same writers and they're kind of doing the same things, and that's not great. You know what really frustrates me though is I think they both do kind of have, both Moffat and Davis, I think they do have it in them to like have a second wind. I mean, the Capaldi era was like a second wind for Moffat. Maybe he has a third and fourth wind in him, maybe somewhere, and occasionally you do kind of see it. Like I thought 73 Yards didn't feel like anything in RTD1. That felt like RTD doing something new. And Moffat, well, maybe not Boom, or like I like Boom a lot, but it's a very well executed Moffat doing the same things. I just think this is a less well executed Moffat doing the same things. I do think they probably can successfully do like new Doctor Who ideas, but that's hard for lots of different reasons. You know, not just like creative ones, but I'm sure production things as well. And it's also just kind of like, what's the, like, even if they can, is it, do we need to like coax out the fifth Doctor Who ideas out of these two guys rather than just getting...
What's the point?
But I know why it's hard. Like if there were other people, it's a whole conversation unto itself. But I think that is why the three of us do keep nipping back at the same thing. It's because it is kind of the central thing to say about this era, I guess, isn't it? Is that this is kind of repetitive.
Yeah, I'm very happy to... Well, I think you're right that in a lot of ways Moffat does have more things to say about Doctor Who, but to be honest, I think he's saying them in other programs.
Yes.
Dracula's Doctor Who Inside Man's Doctor Who. Time Traveller's Wife is sort of Doctor Who. Douglas is cancelled, fully Doctor Who. That's a Doctor Who show. And what those shows all do is they are able to, by being different shows, break the format, right?
Yeah.
You can cancel Douglas, but you can't cancel the Doctor.
Michael Gray could.
He could.
It's amazing you say that, because Moffat has said something which like firmly kind of disagrees with you, but I think you're like 100% right. This will take a little bit to build up to, but I couldn't agree with you more. That's such a good point, isn't it? That he can say new stuff with Doctor Who, but not in Doctor. We sound crazy saying this. It sounds like a total nonsense statement, but I completely get what you mean and agree.
Press Gang is about Doctor Who.
to kind of like wind around there. One of it, like Boom was more about it. I actually rolled my eyes when this happened in the episode. The whole digital ghosts thing is something Moffat's been doing forever. Boom has a larger focus on it because it's much more a crux of the episode. The dad skills hologram dude. And then here we have Trev and then a bit of else, the villain guard stuff. Also, no, I'll sound like a psychotic fan if I rant about pronunciation stuff. I'm going to not touch that. How far back can we go with this? Silence from a Library might be the first time that we've saved save River by like a digital ghost thing. Auton Rory, there's kind of dialogue series 5, 6 about that. Like he kind of remembers. He's kind of the same person, you know, in a way. Series 7 has all the stuff about the souffle analogy of Clara. The echoes are kind of Clara, and it's the recipe is the thing, not the thing itself. Extremis, was my favorite iteration of it, where the simulated video game Mario Doctor is because the performance of the Doctor is the Doctor, which is kind of that kind of goes more. The Doctor being a performance is a bigger Moffat theme than the digital ghost thing, but they wind together nicely in that. Twice Upon a Time is a really foregrounded version of it with the testimony stuff, and the testimony companions even argue with the Doctor at the end. We are the real ones. The Doctor's kind of back and forth on it. I'm sure I've forgot like at least 6 other times Moffat has done this, probably in stuff other than Doctor Who as well.
Yeah, I've got a list.
He clearly really, really, really loves this idea. I think it's cool too. So he had an interview recently, Doctor Who magazine, where he's talking about it. The magazine's kind of bringing up, you do this a lot. And so they're bringing up, you did this in Boom, you did this in Joy to the World. Clearly you're interested in this digital ghost stuff. Moffat says, tell me I'm wrong with AI everywhere now. Yes, it does fascinate me. It's mostly about memory. We have no idea what a living consciousness is. No one has come up with a scientific definition for that at all. No one even has a theory, really. So the only thing of which we are truly and definitely aware is something we cannot explain. If a living consciousness had your exact memory, it would be indistinguishable from you. Then the interviewer and Moffat talk about Star Trek for a while. Moffat's on that topic. Moffat says, if you could create a perfect duplicate of yourself, which one is really you? I have no philosophical or intellectual problem with saying that they both are, and you'll diverge, but up until that point, you're both the same person. Then they go on to bring Heaven Sent into it, and the Doctor talks about the Doctor. That's what a Freudian slip. Moffat says, if you take the idea that teleportation means that you're not really the same person when you come out the other end, you're just another arrangement of atoms that think they're you. But of course, the first time the Doctor teleported in the series was Keys of Marinus, first Doctor. So if you take the idea that teleportation simply creates a copy of the original, he's not been the original Doctor since 1964. Moffat disagrees with that approach. He says, what are any of us apart from an arrangement of atoms? You're not even an arrangement of the same atoms that you used to be. All atoms are identical. So if you're arranged from a different set of atoms with your memories, that's just another you. And so the magazine pushes Moffat. Does this mean the testimony Bill is Bill? Does this mean River Library is River? Are they the originals? Moffat says, I think they are the originals. What do you mean by originals? You are the pattern, not the clay. There are no living atoms, but you are made exclusively of atoms. So making you out of another set of atoms just means there's another you then. There was a line we cut from Forest of the Dead where Donna says, am I still the same me? And the Doctor says, you are the fire, not the fuel. So the formation matters, but the atoms themselves don't. And Moffat, he keeps going on about this idea. He says, we've all done this anyway throughout our lives. You used to look different, sound different, and behave differently. The only thing that connects you to your 10-year-old self is a fairly tenuous line of memory. How are you the same as a baby version of yourself? You'd have more in common with a duplicate that I can make in my special human photocopier than you would with the baby version of yourself. So I'm going along with the Riker story. They're both absolutely authentic. And the magazine, I think marveling at how much he's just spoken eloquently about this idea, talks about, could this whole idea be a future show for Moffat? Like, could he do a whole show about this sorts of identity, cloning, consciousness idea? I do like it, Moffat chuckles, but I'll probably end up developing it even more for Doctor Who because all of my sci-fi ideas go into Doctor Who. So that's an interesting bit I thought that connected with Oliver, the ending there, is that he's got all these great ideas and he's saying, the ideas on this note I probably will just do in Doctor Who itself, which is kind of an admission that I think, of course, he'll come back again at some point.
See, I think, Oliver, what you were saying there about his other shows kind of being expressions of his Doctor Who ideas, I think those ideas in particular, would I be right in saying those are more about the interpersonal ideas within Doctor Who, like the role of the Doctor, like the role of like men and women, and like the way like the Doctor-like characters kind of relate to other people, and not necessarily so much the sci-fi side? Would you say that? Because I feel like his other shows, I mean, even Dracula, which is fantasy, I feel like they don't necessarily delve into the sci-fi side of things so much. Maybe Dracula a little bit, because there's lots of kind of weird kind of fantastical stuff in that show. But like, I feel like what he's expressing outside of Doctor Who, I mean, when he says all his sci-fi ideas go into Doctor Who, what that is kind of separating them from his non-sci-fi ideas, which I think you can see in his other shows like a big time. Yeah.
I feel like the very idea he's talking about there, Time Traveler's Wife kind of did a lot too, like with the conversations had between, a child and adult and different adult versions of a character. So I feel, yeah. But Oliver, what do you think?
I watched actually that Star Trek episode this week. The one with the two Rikers. It's pretty good. Yes, yeah, I agree that especially Douglas is cancelled. Everything else as well, but especially Douglas is cancelled, is iterating first and foremost on the character dynamics, the archetypes, the kind of people that they are, and the kind of people they represent in the world. You do also get Dracula is very concerned about the narrative logic of a character like Doctor Who. That what does it mean for someone to just never die, right? What does it mean for somebody to be bound by these symbols, to be in opposition to religion, and how do those things relate back to character? That is sort of dealing with the fantasy elements. And Time Traveler's Wife to a lesser degree, but obviously that's time travel, and so you get lots of reframing of interpersonal, especially marital dynamics as time loops, and that's the thing he does loads in Doctor Who. And it felt like he iterated on for Time Traveler's Wife, even though all of those components in Time Traveler's Wife are just from the book. So maybe Audrey Niffenegger beat him to all his best ideas. But yeah, largely what he's iterating on are the interpersonal dynamics, which, to be honest, are what I find most interesting. But I do think it's also interesting the way they interface with the sci-fi ideas. I think that, yeah, the digital copy thing's interesting because I'm not sure there is a TV show in that. I'm sure he could do a TV show in which there are digital ghosts and copies and stuff. But seeing as he has pretty much made up his mind, it seems basically a resolved issue in a way that wouldn't end up being terribly interesting as the main focus of a story. And I think that's why the digital ghosts have never really been the focus of any given story. They've been grace notes or parallels or, a way out for characters, but not really the focus of the drama. Because if you do, in fact, believe that the copy is just as authentic as the original and it's fairly simple in philosophical terms, then that's not a very meaty concept to be digging into because you're resolved on the issue.
Yeah, like, I think Heaven Sent is a good example of what you're just talking about, because in that story, any existential shakiness about whether the Doctor's still the Doctor, if he's dying and recreating himself, is what the Doctor is kind of pushing through in order to have this big statement about who he is, his character, his determination, his love for Clara. So it's kind of like the philosophical dilemma is just like in the background, or rather, it's just the terrain he's wading through on the journey to get to the destination. So it's like it's a texture of the story, but it's not the point of the story. It's not the center. In fact, the point is that we're resisting that doubt. That doubt is what's being kind of put aside.
What you're both saying just clicked something intensely in my mind. So this idea of dramas, TV dramas, how much they touch on this digital identity idea, and Moffat talking about AI and everything like this, it just reminded me of something. Gig knows about this, Oliver doesn't know about this. So YouTube has this AI feature now. It's such a strange feature where it's called inspiration, and you click on it and it, like, AI generates images that are meant to be your thumbnails, and an AI generates titles and descriptions. And the idea is like,
Whoa, wait, what?
the idea is, I'll give you the picture of like our one. It's if you can't come up with an idea for a YouTube video or your YouTube podcast or whatever, the YouTube inspiration AI will come up with it for you. And so,
Sorry, is this real?
yeah, I'll show you a picture, but let me get to the point first.
Sorry, go on.
So, one of the ones that came up with for this channel was called Steven Moffat TV Retrospective, and the little description it came up with was, Steven Moffat's work in television is explored in depth, from his early days on Doctor Who to his recent projects like Years and Years, his unique storytelling style, and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, of course, Years and Years is Russell T Davies' show, but it just reminded me Years and Years actually did this whole digital ghost thing. That was actually quite a big point on that show, was the idea of if you become a digital tube thing, are you still who you are or anything? So I guess they have that in common. But yeah, what a bizarre thing as well, that inspiration AI thing.
Well, you say a big point in Years and Years, but it was more like a thing that suddenly cropped up right at the end
That's just RTD's style.
without actually having been like, yeah, fair enough, true.
AI really can't do TARDISes, huh?
It looks so strange, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just the number of windows. It can't seem to get that.
This is great, because I've spent my life, hunting in the dark for inspiration. And now a machine can do it. That's cool. That solves all my problems.
I know it's tangential, but it's such a bizarre thing, isn't it? That like the number one thing like people who like fashion themselves creative can do is come up with ideas. That's like the easiest thing. The hard thing is executing them. The hard thing is actually writing them or forming them together or organizing them. Coming up with ideas is like the fun bit of like discussing with other people, coming up with the idea. It's so strange in this like AI economy stuff that the thing they're trying to like replace is we'll come up with the ideas for you. And then you do like the tedium of like trying to sort it out into whatever you produce. It's just such a bizarre backwards.
I can't believe I didn't write this down, but this hit me at the shops yesterday, actually, as I was thinking through stuff to say on the podcast. The universal symbol for AI, and I don't know when this happened or who decided it, but the universal symbol for AI seems to be that 4-point star.
Yeah.
Curved, indented 4-point star. It's what Google's AI uses, whatever that's called.
Did they call it Gemini or something? I feel like that's a word they're using.
Yeah.
And everything that gives you an AI button to inspire, work emails or whatever, 4-point star. And it stood out to me, and I'm sure this isn't intentional, but it stood out to me that the 4-point star is Bethlehem, right?
Yeah, it's Joy.
That's always a 4-point star, right? And Joy's AI at the end.
I guess the AI companies, like, they want technology to represent like the spark of like either inspiration or ideas or joy or whatever. But I mean, it's telling it in this case with YouTube, like these ideas that it's presented for the channel are just stuff that has already been on the channel regurgitated. So like a retrospective of Steven Moffat, that's literally what we've been doing. It's like, so it's not actually inspiring you. It's just telling you things you've already done, just reshuffled slightly. So it's not really inspiring you with new ideas in any way.
It's the whole dull thing of like this sort of generative AI stuff to me, like in this context of like people using it to co-write. I don't really know the verb for it, to like sort of do stuff for them or come up with ideas or whatever, is like it's like the only things that can come up with this for here are very predictable, I think kind of boring or trite stuff. Like, of course we could do a video where we talk about Steven Moffat's TV shows because we've done that. Of course we could do something about Years and Years because we've done that. Of course we could talk about Doctor Who companions because we've done that. And like Chat GPT and stuff, everything they've like scraped, they can rearrange that in all sorts of ways or whatever. But like the human factor for like us, like I think the interesting conversations we have or the interesting ideas we come up with for videos are like the things where it's not our Doctor Who brains, but it's like something else we're bringing into it. Like even I think some of the more interesting stuff we've discussed tonight is when we were talking about how Moffat's other shows are like kind of doing his Doctor Who ideas into that. And that's not an idea we would have come up with if we were just talking about Doctor Who as like the title of this Joy to the World discussion or whatever would suggest. You know what I mean? It's like the weird human factor of you've experienced all these other things besides the thing you're doing or besides the thing you're talking about, and that's how you get something interesting into it. Like this generative thing, it can only like do what we've done interesting stuff before, obviously, but I don't think we can really make interesting stuff out of just reorganizing the interesting stuff we've already done. The interesting stuff we can do is like Oliver having an idea that we didn't have, or that comes out from something you know what I mean? Like it's when it's you just insular. I know people say this. We've probably discussed this before. This is something people use to complain about modern Star Wars, as it feels very self-referential. Like it's doing all these homages to the existing Star Wars things, whereas like the George Lucas or the 70s, 80s Star Wars were like referencing a big smorgasbord of other things, and that's kind of what made them interesting. It's just kind of an interesting point to me, is like where inspiration comes from is like not in the thing you were doing, but like outside of that.
This feels a bit relevant to the whole Moff stuff, because those ideas that we were talking about, like his Doctor Who ideas manifesting in other locations, and well, I guess even those things that we think of as Doctor Who ideas or ideas about Doctor Who, like, that's kind of another way of saying they are ultimately ideas about life and about, I guess, storytelling in some cases, or about people. And what we want to see are ideas about how Moffat views the world, or, you know, so his views on like all of these ways people relate to each other, existential ideas or anything like that. So all those things, because they don't actually have to be, I mean, obviously they may come from his Doctor Who fandom, him being a long-time fan of the show and a long-time writer of the show, but they can be considered ideas that aren't strictly just about Doctor Who, right? They're also just ideas in their own right. So like what's interesting is how they can be expressed in other ways. Like, they don't have to be strictly Doctor Who ideas. So I know I said I was going to connect that to what we were just talking about. I don't necessarily, it's not necessarily that connected, but I guess Moffat is bringing things from his point of view in his life. So they are kind of Moffat's ideas, his way of viewing things. And what's interesting is like how those could be expressed, not necessarily like what Doctor Who stories could he write. You know, it's like, it's not just, it's the not strictly Doctor Who things that he brings that makes his work kind of interesting, I guess. And it's just like how you were saying just now, like it's our non-Doctor Who brains that kind of bring the spice, so to speak, rather than just like the AI like regurgitating our old cliches.
It strikes me that you two have both seen Dracula?
Oh, we love Dracula.
Yeah, we've seen Dracula, yeah.
Good. It makes the moral argument for Dracula deciding to die. It gets the archetype of Dracula to the point where he's like, right, immortality isn't actually good, I should just be able to die now. It's sort of an argument for endings, and it feels like this episode is sort of making the same argument with Joy, which is in some ways weird and difficult and possibly even problematic, but the way the exact logic of how the AI works and how it works with the star and how the AI becomes the star is all very fuzzy, which, like Gig said about Heaven Sent, gives you the doubt, but also the flip side of doubt is hope. So you end on this beat that Joy dies and the universe opens up to her, and who knows for sure, but we can all hope that there's something after the end. And then we cut around everyone and they've all got hope, right? And so it's reframing the ending of Joy's life and, you know, the ending of London, the Blitz. I think it's Manchester and the Blitz. All these endings are actually also beginnings, and it's okay to let things end because you have hope for the future. But the Doctor can't end, is the issue. We did an ending for the Doctor in The Giggle, but he's got to keep going because the TV show's still going on. And so the Doctor ends this story not dying. He doesn't get the Dracula closure. He doesn't tidy everything up and go gentle into good night. He keeps on. And yeah, like we're saying, you have to do that because that's the TV show Doctor Who, and Doctor Who, the TV show, can't die. But also because it feels like because it can't die, it also can't change. Whereas a lot of Moffat's other work is making an argument for death as change, and even this episode's making an argument for death as change and the exciting and unknown possibilities of what comes after that. But the Doctor's got to keep on keeping on.
Yeah, one great quote from Dracula was, dying gives you size. You know, it's the mountaintop from which your whole life is finally revealed. Mm-hmm. And that feels like one of Moffat's like big ideas, big statements that kind of manifest there, and you kind of probably see it manifested in other places. Again, a perfect example of like one of those ideas that one of those things that makes his writing interesting. It's kind of there.
I've seen a million versions of Dracula. I don't even like. We have friends, which might include you two, who like love a million versions of Dracula. I love the book, and I like a handful of versions, Moffat and Gatiss' one included, but I don't like most of them. So I don't know why I kept doing that. I think when Moffat's Dracula was coming out, yeah, that's what it is. I convinced myself for some reason that I had to absorb like every big version of like Dracula ever, and so I like binged like 30 films and books and stuff that did different takes on it. And anyway, my point with this, I saw the new Nosferatu the other week, and I really liked it, partially for what we're talking about, that I felt like it wasn't just like this slavish, we're doing Nosferatu again and we're doing lots of the regular iconography to do with Dracula, Nosferatu, whatever. It felt like Eggers, the filmmaker, had a very specific outside, I want to do this with the story, which is what made it really interesting to me, is like, I know where everything's going because I've seen Nosferatu and I've read Dracula like a bunch of times, but like thematically and what the film was doing still like surprised me and engaged me a lot, because I felt like there was this outside thing coming into it and wanting to bend things a certain way and tell the story, make this kind of bend the story to be more about something else than that story usually is. And which is a lot of what Moffat and Gatiss' Dracula did as well, like we're talking about. A lot of those themes we're talking about are not really like a focal thing in the novel. Like that's more of a thing that they've brought to it, which is what made presumably us three really like it, was that, you know, it's doing really interesting stuff that's new. And I guess this is its whole own discussion, and this is going to sound much more patronizing than I actually mean it to. But like, I think a lot of people didn't like the show because it wasn't giving them the regular Dracula slop that like lots of versions of Dracula do. I'm sure they have real issues or whatever with the show as well. Certainly, I sound like a dick. I'm sorry, listeners who hated the Dracula show. But yeah, you kind of get what I'm like circling around here. It's like Dracula is a similar thing to Doctor Who, where there's expectations of ways to do it, and it's kind of interesting when people do it differently.
It's particularly striking to me with Dracula because the story doesn't have a particularly obvious structure.
Yeah.
Every time I do a new Dracula thing, it always, and this is going to sound like a silly thing to say, it always particularly occurs to me how much this is an adaptation of an original story, because if you were writing this from scratch, you wouldn't pick this very particular structure.
I feel like the novel feels more transgressive to me than like nearly all the films, because the novel's doing this crazy prose found footage thing, you know, like how long ago before like the Blair Witch Project. I love the novel feels so alive and like new novel, that's the word for it to me. And then I feel like stuff like calcified, we used that word earlier, I feel like something calcified at a certain point with Dracula, and it's like it became the thing, which I don't know. Maybe there's a J&T parallel with the Doctor Who. I don't know.
It's just like cinematic language is so sort of fixed in its ways almost, which is ironic given what it's like and given what you can do with it. But compared to prose, which has had so many years and centuries to go like do all kinds of crazy things and kind of transmit consciousness in this very kind of abstract way, kind of like the rules of what a cinema, like a screen, can kind of show and how it represents reality, feel like it necessarily takes, whenever it's adapting books and stuff, it kind of takes them into a fundamentally more simplistic form for some reason, like in terms of what the storytelling is like. So you just get an instead of like an epistolary novel, like Jonathan writing to letters to it, we just see a video feed of him in the castle, and fundamentally that kind of reduces it in a way. We are really getting off the topic now, aren't we? But like, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, we've talked about like religion and kind of sort of existential stuff, I guess. You know the whole Bethlehem ending, and also the kind of the swipe almost a little bit earlier on when the Doctor talks about how the psychic field around the starseed basically is how you create a religion. What do you think about Moffat's actual portrayal of religion in this story, and particularly I guess the Bethlehem thing? Like, how do you feel his attitude to that? Like, does it feel very sincere to you? Because something about it felt, particularly at the very end, something felt weirdly hollow about it to me. Because Moffat has not particularly been a religiously committed writer, but it felt in this case with the ending he wasn't attacking religion, but like almost giving it lip service is how it felt to me. When the Doctor's like, "Oh my God, your joy, of course, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant! It's Bethlehem, brilliant. Okay, bye," and not really engaging with it in any way, and just putting the chib caption on screen. Something about it felt a little bit shallow to me. Like, what did you guys think?
This is going to sound more like a condemnation than it actually is, so the comparison is not going to be a polite one. Moffat's writing around religion seems to have basically followed the arc of new atheism.
Oh God.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. Where it starts from this sort of very rational, secular perspective of we all don't need religion anymore. And then through the 2010s, it develops that. And then into the 2020s, there's a bit of a pivot towards, okay, I don't actually believe the factual claims of religion, but you see a lot of new atheist types now pivoting to arguing for the sort of mythological or big inverted commas cultural values of Christianity, especially. And I don't think this is that. I don't think this has all the,
racism. Yeah.
Yes, basis of that perspective. But I found it interesting that it follows the same basic arc, that you get a lot of deconstruction of religion in his earlier work from a very rational point of view, and then you get this, I suppose you could call it like a rational-based argument for religion as a belief in this and in Boom as well. The idea that maybe it doesn't matter so much if it's true. There's a value for it in our hearts, or whatever, which is an uncomfortable position for Doctor Who to be in, and I don't think it's making any of the racist claims associated with that. I just noticed the similarity in the shape of the development.
You say people invested the star with significance.
Yeah,
And that's how it connects to the season 1 themes. I guess it's because they show the star kind of representing hope in a secular sense as well. Like the navigators on the mountain, they're like, hey, it's in the stars. Or just like, the stuff like that. So the star doesn't necessarily have to represent like Christianity specifically. It's just right at the very end. It's like, oh, also it's the star from Christianity. Remember that? And it just feels like the religious aspect isn't worked in that much. And the only time that kind of the concept of faith or religion is invoked is that it's this, psychic field from Villengard, kind of hostilely, quite kind of abusively taking control of people. So it just sits like it's uncomfortable with something there to me, and it's got this whole briefcase going through the episode, kind of brainwashing people, and then you kind of spin it around to this hopeful ending where it's like, actually, Villengard is nothing. This is like a bigger sort of pseudo-religious thing that we've got going on. Yeah, it just feels like Moffat's kind of always kind of wiggling around these kind of thorny ideas and not really trying to go as far as make a big dramatic kind of condemnation or declarative statement about them. How did you feel when you saw the Bethlehem caption? I'm just wondering, because I kind of laughed, but also I was like, wow, okay.
Saw it coming way in advance.
Yeah. He sets it up. He mentions it earlier in the episode. And when he was eating the Easter egg, it reminded me of Planet of the Dead, is it? Where he's on the bus, David Tennant, and he's like, he says something about seeing the nativity or something. So it was in my head for two reasons. I thought it was a sweet Easter eggs. I thought the star moment was sweet, which I don't really know is I would have liked something more transgressive. Like, I thought the episode was actually going to have a hotel room be, at the inn, and that could have been interesting and more of a stir. Moffat's very, like Oliver says, he's quite respectful with religion these days. I mean, Boom had lots of lines against it, but then it ended in a fairly warm way. Yeah, I don't think it was really anything that interesting or transgressive in the end, which it doesn't have to be. But the star Bethlehem moment, I just thought was a sweet, hey, it's Christmas time. It's, Jesus, so it's nice. I knew it would set people like our friend Nate off because year 1 AD isn't the year he would have been born. But that was actually, when I saw the number, that was the main thing in my mind, which is like a terrible, awful online-y way to think. But I was like, actually, it wasn't quite that year. But I'm displacing that off to people like Nate. I'm channeling my complaint through saying they'd complain about it, not me. That's how I'm getting around that.
But also, it's not, it's not literally real. It's not like we see Jesus being born or anything.
That's correct. That's the way Moffat could get out of it, saying, well, Jesus was born 3 years later and, in a different month. There's no Jesus on screen.
I actually found the ending really moving. I think for most of the episode, I found Murray Gold really, really overbearing, really in the way. Especially the bit where he plays the Doctor's theme, Series 1, the Doctor's theme, as Ncuti's just unlocking a door.
That was so weird.
Which I swear also happens in the Star Beast. Is it David Tennant's looking at a map or something, and it plays the Doctor's theme?
Yes, on his Sonic map, yeah.
Yeah. What's going on there?
It's a weird. It's used. Wasn't it used in Class as well? When like the Class kids, when the Class alien dude has like a TARDIS visit to save him or whatever. Weird when I think of it as the Eccleston theme. I know it's like a more encompassing one, but it was in 2005 series. It feels almost arbitrary where it pops up, but I mean, my ears perked up and I was like, hey, I know that tune. So maybe that was the idea.
To make me go, I know that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found him in the way for almost all of the episode, but I thought that last track with the star was wonderful.
Yeah.
I thought that was great work on his part. It feels new, which is what it needs to feel. It needs to feel like something totally different to the musical language of the rest of the episode. Yes. And I found the cutting around to everybody becoming metaphors very sweet. It worked for me.
He was, I think Christmas specials aren't always the best showing for Murray because Murray's very maximalist. And I think that works better with episodes that like aren't as much, because then it's kind of an offset thing if he's doing a big showing and maybe the scene isn't, and then maybe that brings the life into the scene. But the Christmas specials, I think inherently are usually written much more syrupy than, well, they're like, the showrunners, I think both of them have talked about, you're kind of theoretically playing for a bigger audience at Christmas, more people watching than usual. So you've got to kind of write the show at a baser. That sounds like insulting, but no, it's kind of true. You have to write it for like a
drunker,
larger audience, so an audience less familiar with the stuff you're regularly doing. And I'm sure with Church, we probably complained about, this is weird because this doesn't really feel like a first episode, but it's a Christmas special. This is all weird. And Moffat had that tension with like doing very continuity heavy Christmas special episodes, which is just an inevitable, it's just a boring like, well, the actor contract ends at the end of the series, then the actor moves on, but the special has to be when they regenerate or when we recover from the regeneration. Gig mentioned Christmas Invasion earlier, I think. So I think the Christmas specials are written more big emotions, as Chib would say. And so I think the issue there was if Murray inherently is very big emotions, and then the show is being bigger emotions than usual, It's kind of like I'm almost getting crushed. It's like the two of them together. The episodes are more emotional than usual, and the Murray music is more emotional than usual. I'm like kind of like, there's only so much I can take, guys. Like I'm getting emotioned out here. Like I'm being overstimulated, basically. Like for like a different episode, maybe some of the music would have played better to me. But there were bits here I'm just like, I can feel the G-force of like everything being thrown at me at once.
Yeah, I don't share lots of people's complaints about 15's emotionality. I don't think that's a problem at all. But the 1-2 punches of the really emotional Silurian death. And then the really emotional goodbye to Anita. Both being played in a similar register. After those two, I'd sort of detached my sads. I hadn't got any more sads in me until the end, and then my sads came back.
I feel like it's a big problem with almost like throughout New Who stuff like those like the Silurian beat and the Anita beat, and I felt like kind of I share the feeling that something wasn't quite working in terms of those being as tear jerking as they want to be, and I think it's just like necessarily overbearing music. I think it almost goes like deeper, like something about how like the pacing and how we are eased into those sequences. I've realized like I want to watch TV where I want to realize or discover how sad and upsetting it is like before the characters do, like before I'm told how sad it is. Like I want it to feel like, oh my God, that's so sad. And then the presentation can, make it more sad if it wants. But I want to actually get into that and feel like I've been taken on that journey emotionally properly. And I feel like that's not quite happening here, because it's like this happens a lot in New Who. I feel like we rush into the sad bit and we're banging the sad drum, and we aren't truly feeling like we're in that story with those characters, with that person, and feeling because even though it is terribly sad that poor Silurian just randomly died, but like also he's like the third person we've seen like randomly die at that point in the story, and it's like I don't know, just something, it never quite feels like the weight is in the right place. And even with Anita, it's really annoying with Anita actually, because I love that whole sequence, and I think the idea of the Doctor just suddenly seeing this one random person and really just genuinely adoring them is an incredibly sweet idea. And I think when he starts to talk to her about that, I find that really sweet and poignant. But just as that conversation goes on, we get this reverse shot, just going back and forth between their faces. I'm just like, oh, think of me, Anita at the Sandringham. It just feels like it starts to lose me. Something like it stops feeling like something real.
Is it asking too much of you? It's like, is the show asking you too directly? Like Murray and Moffat are all like kind of grinning at you, going, "Anita, it's a big deal, right?" Is that how you feel?
Something feels artificial. I think it just feels like the strokes feel too broad for something that sincere, and I end up just not really feeling anything at it, which is a shame. I just wish that bit had made me cry the way it wants to.
Yeah, the Forward Lang Syne bit as well is particularly, I think part of that is because as a Christmas special, but also more generally as what Doctor Who is, it has to both be playing for the attentive audience who are really paying attention. It has to play for a whole family, right? It has to play for the really attentive people in the audience and the people who can't really focus and get distracted and don't know what's going on. meaning it has to pay for the attentive kids and it has to play for the distracted adults, especially at Christmas when the adults are drunk and the kids have been waiting for Doctor Who all day and they're really keyed in. And for that kind of show, you need somebody to be able to key into the emotions as they walk into the room with a sandwich. So all the characters need to be emoting very loudly. The music needs to be doing a lot because, you know, your dad needs to know how to feel as well.
This is like not that. Like that's very Murray being very obvious what he's doing. There was a really weird thing. I'm not complaining. You know, Voyage of the Damned. Remember how Murray had a few years where he would do like a song, like the Song for 10 and stuff like that. If you remember the Stowaway back from the Tenet years.
He said, "For I will steal, I'll find a way to be with my lover upon Christmas Day, and I'll run and I'll roam, I'll cover the ground. This Christmas I'll see you, I'll be around."
There's like a little musical reference to that at the very start of this when like Shooty's walking out to get the milk or whatever. I feel like Murray's trying to make a tradition where he does like very random references to Christmas specials. Because you remember in the 60th, we had music from Last Christmas, like reprised. So I feel like, I don't know what he's doing there. Like he's a very mysterious man. Like the withholding thing with the soundtracks and like sometimes very, I know there's a method to his madness because he talks about it a lot. Or like he wants there to be some impression of a method. I guess it's 2 Christmas specials. What am I complaining about? I just want to sound smart for noticing it, I think. But it's different music. It's interesting. I also feel like what you're saying, Oliver, sometimes the episodes carve out space for like the big Murray wank. And then it like work. Like Doomsday is like a really, really emotional bit of music. But the episode like has space for it. There's like a montage going on. And so it has all the space to move. The ending of the episode, like you're talking about, also a montage. The music works great over montages. Also like has space for it to work. I think where it works less well for me is like it's a regular scene and then Murray's still going like towards you. Then I'm like, dude, I'm not in the mood. It's like when we're like got a montage with not much dialogue and we're going over lots of different things. It's like a big scale. Then I'm in the mood for, you know, all the big emotion stuff. It's when we're just in a more regular, like the Anita thing. And then we're also getting big grand music. It's like, then I'm like, whoa, I would enjoy this on the non-existent soundtrack in isolation, but in the context of the episode. And I'm Murray's biggest fan, but in the context of the episode, I'm like, whoa, this is a lot to process.
Do you mind if we segue into direction?
Yeah.
Yes, please. Go ahead.
What did you think of the direction? I thought it was bad.
The fly thing. The thing with the fly. When I first watched this, it was on a really small screen. And then the second time I watched it on a TV with family. And the first time, well, 2 things. The first time, I thought there was 3 wise men on the camels at the end. And then I watched it on TV and I realized there was no one on the camels. So it was actually a bit less overt than I thought. And the second thing, the fly thing, it might have actually worked better on the smaller screen. Because then I'm like, I can't really work out what's going on, but I assume there's a fly somewhere. And then on the bigger screen, I was like, this is very small. This is kind of hard to pass. The fly thing I think was really poorly done. Because already the production design has kind of screwed it in that, I mean, they all do excellent work, don't get me wrong. But I think there's been a miscommunication or something somewhere. Because the hotel room looks fine and the script is like asking for it not to be fine. Presumably it's what the dialogue's like. And then the fly thing is like you can barely pass visually that there's a fly buzzing around the room. The room already looks nice. We can't really see the fly. I'm sure many viewers didn't even get that there was a fly. Really. That was the most annoying direction bit for me. I don't know what you guys thought of that. Am I complaining way too much?
I share that complaint. I thought it was very up and down throughout the episode. And in a lot of places where it could have been doing something more interesting, like visually, it kind of wasn't. And also then towards the end, you get, I mean, the shot of, once Joy has absorbed the starseed, you get the shot of her kind of standing there and glowing. And I thought that was some of the weakest effects shots that we've had in the show, like all decade. Genuinely, like laughable, like what the fuck has happened here? Watching her stand there, it was literally like something straight out of like sub 2005 almost is how it felt there. It was like, whoa. I mean, that's just more an effects complaint. I feel fundamentally that direction goes much deeper than that. Fundamentally, it's the choices of how you visually represent the space and the screen and the people throughout the story. Like it's everything. And I feel like there are so many points in this episode where there could have just been like more done with the material. I mean, like I mentioned like a minute ago with the Anita goodbye and the constant reverse shot of them, just going back to Anita's face and the Doctor's face and her kind of, it just felt static and kind of like not emotionally alive in a way that bugged me.
It feels like a Doctor Who trial by fire to do an emotional scene where one of the characters is glowing with magic golden energy.
Yeah.
But like the Astrid version of this scene looks better. The Idris, Doctor's wife version looks much better. Doctor facing off with the planet Akaten and the fire. That looks better. This is all like a decade ago. And looks much better to me than the way that scene is shot. The Anita sequence had the most sort of directorial flair, and even that felt a bit flat to me. Especially seeing as it's a montage, there's so much you can do with matching shots to each other. You could have, for example, had like the 3 scenes in a row where they're in the hotel room just chatting. You could have, say, shot them on exactly the same angles, so you give an impression of the compression of time as it's cutting from one to the other. The hotel is all shot in a very straightforward way. The scene with the dinosaur looks ugly. I don't know, there wasn't any flair. The scene that we go through twice in the hotel room has something that sort of interested me, in that we bias towards the different Doctors each time through. So it's the same basic shots, but we spend more time on the Doctor whose perspective we're following each time around, which is fairly straightforward. You know, you tend to bias your shots towards the character perspective we're following. So it makes sense that it flips the second time through, but it's a very minimal effect, and almost nothing is done with the fact that it's a repeated scene. So, for example, we could have shot it from the other side of the 2 characters. We could have even be using exact inverses of the shots, or following Joy's perspective for a bit. I just felt like there was a lot of opportunity to go above and beyond with the direction that wasn't taken up on. And instead it feels very practical, very much like it's an impressive job getting all those sets built and working. And I feel like that's where the direction energy has gone, rather than in making it visually interesting. Which, yeah, is a shame, I think, because Moffat scripts are asking for a really creative direction, I always find. And directors who don't take them that extra mile. Always is a little disappointing.
In the Doctor Who magazine 612, Moffat's talking about the script and that the director kept pushing him to put more visual clarity and like specifications in the script so that he knew exactly what shots he needed to get to like have clarity with the edit. And he talks specifically about the big rope climax we've talked about, that he really wanted Moffat to like go back and put in the script, be really specific with what we need set up here, so I know to get the shot, to put in the shot. And Moffat kind of talks up in it looked great, the climax, because everything made sense and everything.
I think making sense is the bare minimum, I would say, in terms of what's happening. I get it, like totally, that's what you need to do, but you know, it's not the entire job.
It is, like, this is a difficult show to make, and it is impressive to anchor off the back of a train is pulling open a door 2,000 years in the past. Like, that's a complicated idea to visually communicate, and it does that. Like, I know what's going on in that sequence, but it's not interesting to look at, I didn't find. I've been very harsh on the direction.
Gig, what was the worst visual moment for you?
Well, I mean, definitely the glowing joy. I don't think there's anything that tops that in terms of like. Actually, no. Actually, I've changed my mind. It's the fly, just the dot on the screen buzzing around the upper half of the frame. Well, like, poor Nicola Coughlan just has to kind of like look vaguely in its direction, just standing in the middle of the frame. Like, what's going on there? Yeah, just like we couldn't get like any sort of just anything to communicate that there's a fly buzzing around. Even the slightest movement of the camera It was just like, it was too much, I guess. Yeah.
There's also, this is petty, but there's a moment where the other worker at the hotel, the one who gets the briefcase first, comes to get Trev to trick him to give him the briefcase. And he steps out into the hall, carefully holding the briefcase behind some frosted glass so that we can see that the briefcase is there, but nobody else can see it, right? The character's hiding the briefcase from the other characters. And he says, Trev, come with me, I need to show you something. And then we cut to another shot so you can get the ADR in, where he says, someone's left this strange briefcase lying around, which doesn't make any sense because he's hiding the briefcase from Trev because Trev knows to be looking out for a briefcase because that's what's going on in the story. But presumably somebody worried that people not paying attention would get confused. And so there's an explainer that this is about the briefcase, which doesn't make sense. And I thought that's poor direction.
I know what shot you're talking about because this is such a stupid trivia thing. You've said an interesting thing. Now I'm saying an uninteresting thing. Where Joel Fry standing outside says the Tambles, which is a reference to the time traveler's wife, surname, main character.
And Mr. Ben, the costume shop.
Yeah, that's that's lost on me. That's you guys understand that. That's a British show.
What? Sorry.
What is the Mr. Ben is like a costume changing thing?
Yeah, so in the hotel lobby, there's an Outfitters called Mr. Ben's, and Mr. Ben's a cartoon I watched when I was little, where a guy goes to a costume shop and tries on a costume, and when he goes into the changing room to try on the costume, he turns up in the time period that the costume is from. So, you know, he dresses like a pirate and then he's in pirate times and we get a short adventure in pirate times and then he steps back out of the changing room and goes, actually, I'm not going to buy this costume. And that's each episode of the show.
Oh, right.
Anyway, that costume shop is in the hotel.
That's cool.
Do you kind of think that it had a story like this happened in the past era? Do you think Anita would have been played up as more romantically longing for the Doctor? Because that's kind of, it just kind of reminded me of that sort of thing. When it became obvious he was going to leave her heartbroken, I was kind of rolling my eyes like, oh boy, the Doctor, you know, rolling into a woman's life and her pining for him. Never seen that before. But then I was kind of a bit refreshed by the fact that they kept it focused on the idea that they're friends. Like, I'm not saying she can't possibly have been had feelings for the Doctor, but at one point she kind of acknowledges that she sees him as gay, and he's like, "Oh, I don't have a boyfriend." And she's like, "Okay," but like that feels like a distinct thing versus past eras of the show, like past kind of Moff stuff. It just feels like a slight change of emphasis there, which I appreciated. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's funny to praise the absence of things, though.
Yeah,
but I get what you mean. Yeah,
yeah. All the little companion relationships, not having to play any of them as big romances. Like Christmas specials would so often in the past be like a romantic fling. So yes, it's nice to not be doing that this time. I've got one last thing. Right at the end, just in the run up to the climax, the Doctor goes through the Orient Express and goes right through to the door at the back. Then he throws out the rope and it hooks onto a thing and it opens the thing. But the door at the back of the train is locked, and he gets out the Sonic and he unlocks it, which struck me as a bit of a hump in the climax. It's a really
that was weird,
frenetic sequence. So I was wondering why that was there. Why pause the action to unlock the door at the back? And it occurred to me that the door is wood, which feels like a subtle little thing. You know, like you say, it's almost certainly not actually Moffat's last episode, but it's got the pretense of being, and so that's a cute detail.
Wouldn't the lock be metal though, like the latch on the door? Like,
yes, it would. Realistically, it would.
Also, the fact that Sonic works on it, nonetheless.
Yeah, the image that occurred to me was that right at the climax of theoretically the last episode of Moffat's era, you have the Sonic working on wood. And look, that's a bow.
I feel like there's one more thing that I guess we haven't specifically talked about. The shot of Joy's mum kind of dissolving into golden particles. What do we think of that choice specifically there? I just mean that specific thing. Like, not necessarily, I mean, because like choosing to show kind of Joy's mum in the hospital, I think that was kind of an interesting kind of raw like choice, kind of emotionally quite brutal there. I'm just wondering, like, sort of the decision to actually have like Joy like absorb her mum like that. What did you guys think? Because I feel like something that would have felt like a more obvious choice or like more, I don't know, straightforward emotionally would be to have like, I don't know, a ghostly or magical projection of Joy like in the room, like to hug her mum or something. Whereas like the mum actually getting like disintegrated, kind of in a way that calls back to the other characters being disintegrated earlier on. That felt quite different to me and kind of I don't know. It felt quite something about it. You know what? Let me change tack slightly. It felt sort of slightly Disneyfying Joy's mum's kind of passing away in a way that felt cut against the realism of the whole kind of lockdown scenario to me. Does that feel accurate at all? What did you guys think?
I had no idea what the hell was happening. I still don't. Joy's mum was becoming one with the star villain guard AI thing. That's like, I got there was like a dying ascending thing, but I was really confused, partially from the visuals, partially from my own idiocy. I don't know. Was it clear to you, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it doesn't make actual sense. I think it's a use of an effect in a place where it doesn't actually make sense to use that effect to sort of explode open the metaphor a little bit. Joy has created an afterlife thereafter where she gets to be with her mum again, and it's a very straightforward sort of heaven analog. And the only way it makes sense that Joy's mum in the hospital evaporates into stardust and becomes one with the star is if you just go, oh yeah, it's a heaven analog, instead of trying to make it work as an actual sci-fi thing. So that's what it felt like to me, going, this is pure metaphor. It's a star, it's hope, it's non-literal.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Is Moff worried about dying? Boom had a lot of this stuff as well.
Well, I think we're all a bit worried.
I think he probably is. I think you can probably see a lot of his stuff maybe as an effort to sort of reconcile with death, or kind of rationalize or just negotiate with the concept of death, kind of become at peace with it and its inevitability. I think that kind of, it's a way through a lot of the stuff that he's done sort of lately, a lot of his work around death and kind of paranoias around it, and sort of talking about the necessity of death and the horror of not being able to die and all those things. He's sort of worked with that a lot. And maybe, I don't know if he's worried or if he's not worried, or if he uses his writing to kind of work through worry or stuff like that. But, it's a big thing. I mean, why wouldn't it be?
I think most people are a bit worried about dying.
If Moffat's AI consciousness preservation thing comes to pass, I guess there's no need under his worldview. Maybe that's why he should do the digital ghost show, to be like, if we give the AI guys more money, they'll solve this for us.
Yeah, and they make an AI version of Moffat. They can get that to write episodes for the 80th anniversary instead of him, and they probably won't even be that much worse.
Anyway, next week on Who Cares, we're doing years and years predictions for the future.
Yes, that wraps us up for Joy to the World, or Joy to the Worlds, as a lot of the Disney promotion for some reason branded it. Did anyone see that? They were doing like posters that added the S at the end, Joy to the Worlds. I don't know. I don't think it was a mistake, surely. Was it like an intentional thing to like change the title? Like, is the pun sci-fi worlds? They don't really go to different worlds in this special, so I don't know. If anyone else saw that, tell me what you thought of the Joy to the World's weird promotion thing. Anyway, let us know what you thought of the episode and what we had to say about it. And let's continue on Series 2 sometime this year. Exciting. Thanks for listening.